1 chick per burrow. $37.47.
Never before has a marine ecosystem undergone such intensive study.
Many of the subgroups in AV-Pod have declined since the spill when they lost crucial members.
But never before has such a rich yet fragile environment suffered an impact like the one that occurred on March 24, 1989, in Alaska's Prince William Sound. The Exxon Valdez was fully loaded with North Slope crude oil when it ran aground on Bly Reef. Nearly 11 million gallons of crude oil bubbled up from the torn hull of the 987-foot tanker and spread west across Prince William Sound. Efforts to contain the spill before it hit sensitive beaches proved futile due to a lack of equipment, expertise, and organization. The unthinkable had happened, and no one was prepared to respond. Three days after the accident, oil began washing up on hundreds of miles of shoreline, smothering beaches and wildlife in its path. The oil continued its relentless march south, surrounding the bird colonies of the Barren Islands, traveled up into Cook Inlet, and then onto Kodiak Island and down the Alaska Peninsula. On May 18th, 56 days after the spill, oil came ashore near the village of Chignik, 470 miles from Bly Reef. The destruction of animal life was unprecedented. An estimated 250,000 seabirds, 2,800 sea otters, 300 harbor seals, up to 22 killer whales, and untold millions of intertidal plants and animals were lost in the wake of the nation's largest oil spill. There were human victims as well, for whom the accident took a different kind of toll.
Seemed like everything just seemed to disappear after the oil spill.
It's affected our subsistence lifestyle. That's what it's doing. It's taking a lot of what we eat off the ocean away from us.
It's hard to describe except try and picture a place that you care about, that you put all your heart and soul into and think a lot about, and then think of it with several feet of oil dumped on top of it, black crud, and doing everything you can to clean it up and knowing it's pretty futile.
This is a story about tragedy and recovery. 10 years after the Exxon Valdez spill, some of the injured species, such as bald eagles, have regained their pre-spill populations. Others are slow to recover, like Pacific herring, so critical to the entire food web, and sea otters. Still others, such as harbor seals and pigeon guillemots, are not recovering, for reasons that have more to do with natural environmental changes than with oil. Both state and federal governments sued Exxon, resulting in an out-of-court settlement in 1991 that required the oil company to pay $100 million in criminal restitution and a civil settlement of $900 million to be paid out over 10 years.
We're also reviewing the update on injured resources and services that was...
The Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council was created to use the civil settlement to help restore injured wildlife populations. Settling on two primary goals, the Trustee Council dedicated 57% of the funds to protect habitat for the long-term health of injured species, and about 26% for research and restoration projects. Recognizing that little was known about the Gulf of Alaska ecosystem, an intensive 10-year scientific program was launched to gain the knowledge necessary to aid the recovery process.
22.4.
Ecosystems are huge here. I mean, you look at a pond of water and think of all the things that influence how different animals react in that pond, and multiply that to something the size of the Bering Sea and out of the Gulf of Alaska, or any major ecosystem area. And it's not too hard to see that our ability even to get out there and measure what's there is pretty limited. All we can do is improve our understanding and try and improve our ability to predict things that are important to us.
135.
In the days and weeks following the accident, no image was more powerful than those of the dying sea otters that came to symbolize the Alaska oil spill and its widespread devastation.
The sea otter populations in the most heavily influenced areas don't appear to be fully recovered at this time. It's a difficult question to answer. We do know that the number of animals that are here now in some of these areas are less than the number of animals that we took out dead as a result of the spill, which is, I guess, some of the best evidence that recovery may not have fully occurred by now. What we're doing is comparing two areas. This area here at Knight Island that was very heavily oiled, and a similar area at Montague Island that was out of the oiled area. And what we're finding is that the densities of animals, of sea otters in this area is about 10 times less than it is at Montague Island.
Much of the field work involves capturing otters in Prince William Sound and assessing their overall health.
I think we've got some otters. We've got 2. All right.
Tangle nets are sometimes employed to capture passing otters, but because long-term studies require repeated captures of the same animal, researchers have become very resourceful.
The other method that we're using is the Wilson trap, which employs a large basket trap that divers operate, divers that are using closed-circuit scuba rebreathers. Basically with that we'll try and find a group of resting animals or even a single resting animal, and divers will go out from the boat and travel up underneath the animals while they're resting and put the basket up underneath them and force it through the water, and the animals dive down into the trap. There's a purse string on the trap that the diver pulls, and then the animals capture them.
We got an otter in the trap, I think otter and pup in the trap.
Here we go.
One in the box.
That makes it 5 for today.
Sea otters are recovering to healthy populations throughout most of the spill region. But why are they slow to return to the oiled portions of Prince William Sound?
Hey, where's our dentist at?
Continued monitoring of sea otters is necessary to learn whether oil continues to impact these local populations, or whether natural recovery from the loss of thousands of animals simply takes time.
We try to minimize the amount of handling time in any way we can. If we have long distances from where we captured the animal to where we processed it, we'll take it by skiff back to the capture location and release it at that point.
Okay. Grab the pup, Mom.
And Mom can say hello to hers.
Yeah, she's glad to be done with us.
Yeah.
Prince William Sound in the Gulf of Alaska is home to large and diverse populations of seabirds. In the spring of 1989, many species were heading to rookeries in Prince William Sound and nearby islands in the Gulf of Alaska. So was the oil from the Exxon Valdez. The collision that resulted was devastating for diving seabirds like the common murre as they resurfaced in the oil. For some species, like the small marbled murrelet, the oil spill came at a time when they were already experiencing significant population declines.
In 72 and 73, Fish and Wildlife Service, because of the Valdez pipeline going online, did surveys in the Sound and came up with population estimates for all seabirds. And at that time, marble murrelets were the most abundant seabird in Prince William Sound. They had numbered about 300,000 birds. No good studies were done that were sound-wide until after the oil spill in 1989. And at that time, the estimate was more like 100,000 birds. So that indicated about a 67% decline in murrelets in Prince William Sound. We don't know how much of that occurred before the spill.
The lack of recovery for many seabird populations has bird biologists spending much of their time studying the tiny fish they prey on.
Is the cord being pulled?
No, it's okay. Okay.
In the Sound, we have a really good opportunity to look at the fish that they eat, their diet, the forage fish, which we think has a lot to do with what's going on with the population.
The Barren Islands are a group of 7 islands in the Gulf of Alaska, about 200 miles from where the Exxon Valdez grounded on Bligh Reef. As the oil crept westward, it eventually surrounded the islands, threatening over 20 species of seabirds that nest here, including puffins, kittiwakes, and murres.
We don't know how many from this population were actually killed. Estimates have ranged up to over 200,000 killed, even 300,000. It's very difficult to tell.
As with the marbled murrelets, the impact of the oil spill in the Barrens came at a time when seabird populations were already being affected by other environmental factors.
A number of the colonies did indeed appear to have declined from about the mid-70s until the spill. Similar declines were well documented in the Bering Sea during that period. It may easily have been a result of some changes in the environment. Sea surface temperatures have changed, which affects forage fish and so on.
Primary 6.
Kittiwakes are a good indicator of fairly dramatic changes in prey availability. By looking at kittiwakes, we can see fairly quickly whether some of these species like sand lance are actually present in the surface waters or not. And if they're not, that would indicate that something is different, probably in terms of temperature in the ocean. I got another count, 1140.
1,100.
All right.
Not bad, we'll take it.
Yeah.
The harlequin duck is one of several species that have not yet recovered. Biologist Dan Essler is trying to find out why.
There's been a long-standing concern about the effects of harlequin ducks just because of some of the attributes of their life history makes them more susceptible to the effects of oil. Their whole time in Prince William Sound is spent in the intertidal zones, which is the area that served as a repository for a lot of the oil. So from that respect, there's been a lot of concern about their recovery.
Don't drop them.
Don't drop them now. We get them back to the boat after we've captured them, and then we do banding. We put a band on every bird, including a color-coded tarsus band, different color for oiled and unoiled areas.
2608.
And then we measure a whole suite of morphometrics and body mass, things that relate to the bird's physiology and condition.
Radio transmitters on adult female harlequins have shown that overwinter survival may be a limiting factor to population recovery in oiled areas.
The results for the first 2 years are that there's an 8% poorer survival probability in the oiled area versus the unoiled area. And 8% is actually a pretty large number when you're looking at survival rates and using these estimates to predict population growth rates.
Since the opening of the Alyeska Marine Terminal in 1977, two major Alaska industries, commercial fishing and shipping oil, have coexisted in Prince William Sound. Then, on March 24, 1989, they too collided. Salmon fisheries were closed because of the oil spill. Pink salmon, many of which spawn in intertidal areas, laid their eggs in oil-contaminated streams, which resulted in a higher than normal mortality. A decade later, fishermen still feel the impact of the Exxon Valdez.
Lack of pink salmon wild stocks, they are rebounding back in certain years now. The herring, we were missing the total class of 4-year-olds, and we couldn't figure that out, but we never seen a lot of those effects till after, even though they said, you know, we had record runs, we did. But those fish were already out in the ocean and maturing. So we did see a big impact in the herring.
We've missed quite a few different herring seasons, and herring is still weak. It's cut my income and my husband's income about in half since the spill. And worse than that almost is the years that we just didn't get to fish at all.
When the herring that hatched during the oil spill were due to spawn in 1993, the population crashed. Research since that time has identified a virus as the probable cause, but oil, combined with changing ocean conditions, may have stressed the population and caused the disease to spread.
My conclusion is that the oil is a stressor that causes expression of the virus, and so you're only going to see virus where you have oil or some other stressor. And so both kind of go hand in hand. And of course that's a big concern here in Prince William Sound because the herring are very important both to the economy of the area as well as subsistence users and the wildlife in the area, both birds and mammals. We try to go out 3 times a year. We get a pre-spawning sample, which we did in late March. We get a spawning sample, which we did just now. And then at the end of the summer or early fall, we'll go out and get a sample after they're in peak condition.
For the native people of Prince William Sound, the absence of herring has impacted their food supply and their subsistence culture, including the tradition of gathering herring spawn on kelp each spring.
You've seen a great decline after the oil spill. We used to just go right down in front of the village there on the beaches, any place we wanted to, and get this.
The harbor seal is also an important staple for the Alutiiq people, but their numbers in Prince William Sound have dropped 80% during the past 20 years.
Seals are probably one of the most important resources that we harvest. We understand that the population was declining before 1989, but there was a much more noticeable decline since 1989.
In the last 15 to 20 years, we've had major unexplained declines in harbor seals and sea lions, both in the northern Gulf of Alaska, not just Prince William Sound, but throughout the northern Gulf, and also some of the seabird species. And the things all of those animals have in common is they eat these little small forage fish, things like capelin, herring, sand lance. We've all really come around to thinking it must have something to do with food availability, and probably the availability of these little tiny food fish. There's been a pretty persistent warming period over the last, well, it started in the late 1970s. The average annual temperature jumped something like 3 degrees. And along with that went an increase in ocean temperature. And 3 degrees doesn't sound much to you or I, but to a fish in the ocean, it's a tremendous difference.
One of the challenges for researchers is to determine what changes in the ecosystem are part of a natural cycle and which are caused or made worse by oil. To help understand the harbor seal decline, researchers must capture animals to evaluate their physical condition.
They come on board. One of the first things that happened is they get weighed. Each seal gets measured, and we use that to compare growth over a long period of time. We put a small satellite transmitter that, well, originally was about 3 inches by 6 inches on the back of the animal. That unit sends a signal to an orbiting satellite, much like your television or telephone satellite, and from that information, from that signal, you can locate the animal. You can actually tell where it is in Prince William Sound or in the Gulf of Alaska. You can tell how deep the animal's diving, how long the animal's diving, and that's all recorded for the last 24 hours. So it's a phenomenal amount of information.
After 10 years, is the oil gone from Prince William Sound? Most visual signs of the oil are gone, removed by storm erosion and other natural processes. There is still oil on many beaches, however. During the summer of 1997, cleanup crews returned to Sleepy Bay on Latouche Island, an area used for subsistence gathering by the nearby village of Chiniga Bay.
Primarily it's stuck in between the cracks of these large rocks, which is protecting it from breaking down naturally. The oil spill really affected the Chiniga people, more so perhaps than anybody else. They're the only people who really live next to the oil.
These are our beaches, so we really like to make sure that they're safe and clean, and we have good sea life out here to be able to live off of, because that's what we use as subsistence out here. You know, that's our means of life.
At the time of the Exxon Valdez spill, Prince William Sound was starting to be transformed by increased development pressure. In some areas, clear-cuts now scour the mountains that form the dramatic backdrop for the protected waters of the Sound. Because of high market prices and easy, accessible logging, the lush, old-growth forests of Afognak Island were also disappearing. Lodges and other developments were planned on private land within Kenai Fjords National Park and in Alaska's oldest national wildlife refuge on Kodiak Island. Early on, the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council decided that one of the best ways to help injured species recover was to protect habitat critical to their long-term survival. In this way, marbled murrelets, threatened in most of the United States and Canada, will always have the old-growth forest they need for nesting. More than 280 salmon streams have been protected, ensuring healthy runs of salmon, which require undisturbed gravel for spawning, and vegetated riverbank to protect tiny fry from predators and fast-moving currents. 1,400 miles of shoreline have been permanently protected, roughly 1 mile of shoreline for every mile touched by oil in 1989. So pigeon guillemots, black oyster catchers, herring, and harbor seals will have undisturbed areas to nest, spawn, feed, and rest. Through outright purchase agreements or conservation and timber easements, about 650,000 acres have been preserved, safeguarding wildlife habitat and the natural splendor of Prince William Sound, the Kenai Fjords, and west to the islands of Shuyak, Afognak, and Kodiak.
I'm very glad that the lands will be there in their present state and not be logged. My grandchildren will be able to hunt and fish there, without having to go up into an area that doesn't have any trees, That's the worst thing that could happen to this area if we had logging. I could just see some of this island here, especially without any trees. That would just break my heart.
Has the spill region recovered? For most visitors to Prince William Sound, it is once again a place of extraordinary beauty. For scientists and all those who knew the Sound before and after, most agree that recovery is not complete. Ultimately, what constitutes full recovery in an ecosystem undergoing so many changes may be too difficult for anyone to answer, at least for now.
Hopefully that we can take what we're learning here and can serve as a foundation for the next event that occurs similar to this. They'll happen, they're going to happen, they're happening now. And I think that can be some part of the legacy that's left from this, what was once a disaster.
A reaction of mine has been that the Sound has recovered amazingly well. I hesitate to say that means it's recovered. I think there are subtle changes that are still present. Certainly there is still oil present on many of the beaches. I think perhaps the expression, the glass is half full or half empty, may apply to this one.
Ten years after the largest and most destructive oil spill in U.S. history, it is clear that nature is by far the best tool for restoration. But nature will take time to finish the job, and we must do our best to help her along by protecting essential habitat and by continuing our efforts to understand and to become better stewards of this complex and ever-changing marine environment. That will ultimately be the legacy from the tragedy known as Exxon Valdez.